shrubby cinquefoil, Potentilla fruticosa, very common landscape plant that can be found in many local nurseries, native throughout through the western United States at higher elevation. This plant can grow from 1 to 4 feet tall and 2 to 4 feet wide. It's deciduous, so it drops its leaves in the fall, and it has a naturally tight rounded form, which you can maintain if you if it starts to develop thin, straggly growth. You can just shear it to within a foot of the ground and it'll come back again with a nice tight form. Might take a couple of years, but it will come back. This is a great plant that just it tolerates the full sun, but it also tolerates light shade. So if you have areas of your landscape that are really sunny at some times of the day and then they get shady during other times, this is a good plant for use in those areas. It shows a medium drought tolerance, so it might take a little bit extra water, but not that much, and provides nesting and cover for songbirds, which is really great as we're losing a lot of our songbirds all over the United States. And again, another one where there are multiple cultivars available with different color flowers. So now let's turn to plants that are native to the foothill zone. Remember, this is at lower elevations, not the desert zone, but lower elevations. This is actually the zone where most urbanization is occurring right now. A lot of people are building up into the foothills, up against mountainous areas. And so it's a zone we should pay attention to. Plants that are native to this zone are used to having fair levels of moisture, but maybe a little bit drier conditions with more well-drained soils. So you're going to mulch these plants rather than with an organic mulch, maybe using rock or gravel or decomposed granite. These plants should be watered every week or up to 10 days, and then only use compost if you suspect a nutrient deficiency. Compost will provide a whole diversity of nutrients on a very, very slow release basis, which is something that those plants are used to when they need extra nutrients. And if the plant doesn't need those nutrients, it won't take them up. Unlike if you provide fertilizers, where if the plant doesn't need those nutrients, they aren't taken up, but then they're also leached into our groundwater and into waterways. And so better to use compost for our native plants if nutrients are required. So let's take a look at some of the plants that are native to this region. And one is Saskatoon serviceberry, Amelanchier ulnifolia, which is native in most of Western United States. So it's readily available. It grows 10 to 12 feet tall, 8 to 10 feet wide, tolerates light shade, and has a medium drought tolerance. You can use it in ornamental plantings, or if you've got some naturalized areas, it works really well there as well. There are some cultivars available. One cultivar called Regent has a more compact form than the species. This plant is highly attractive to native bees, and it's a larval host for the California hairstreak and elf butterflies. So great plant for attracting and supporting pollinators. Netleaf hackberry, Celtis reticulata, is native to the southwestern US, and that includes Nevada and Utah. So this is a western cousin of common hackberry. It's a smaller multi-trunk tree with orange fruit instead of black fruit, which you see in the common hackberry. So it's got these lovely orange fruit. The tree can be used on dry sites or on patios. It requires sun, but it'll also tolerate part shade and has a high drought tolerance, so you don't have to provide a lot of water to this tree. You want to water it deeply, but less frequently. It also provides food for birds, and so it's a great support for some of our wildlife. Apache plume, Fallujah paradoxa, is native to the southern part of the western US, and that includes Nevada. This plant grows to about 5 feet tall and wide, and it might remind you of another really common landscape plant. Have you ever planted or seen smoke bush or smoke tree? This shrub has a very similar appearance, but it requires a lot less water than smoke tree. So it's very beautiful. It's in the rose family, so it has those typical 5-petaled flowers with many golden anthers in the center, and then fruits that emerge that give it its smoky appearance. It does require full sun, and it prefers rocky, gravelly, well-drained soils. Can be used as a hedge or as a specimen plant in ornamental plantings. And again, it does provide habitat and browse for small mammals. Blue flax, Linum lewisii, is probably one of my favorites. I love plants that have blue flowers because it's so unusual. This is native to much of Western North America. So it's pretty widely available. It gets to be anywhere from 6 inches to 30 inches tall, depending on where you plant it, and it will spread. It blooms May to July, and its best use is in meadow gardens, has very high ornamental appeal because of those cornflower blue colors, which also are very attractive to native bees. It's a lot more drought tolerant than it looks. It can be short-lived, however, it does self-sow, and so it will come back year after year, and which gives a nice, you don't have to keep replanting it every year. And it's pollinated again by native bees, honeybees, and butterflies. So a great plant for supporting wildlife. Mountain bee balm, Monardella odoratissima, is native to coastal and Great Basin regions of North America. This plant gets to be 6 inches to 12 inches tall, and it has this really nice rounded form, blooming in July to September when a lot of other plants aren't bloom. So it's one of those nice late summer into fall blooming plants. It's easy to establish and maintain. It's a beautiful aromatic plant, so it's got a very nice aroma to it that grows in this nice little tidy mounded form. So it's perfect for flower or rock gardens, especially in areas where you don't want to put a lot of water. And as its common name suggests, it's highly attractive to native bees, which is why we call it mountain bee balm. Penstemon. Oh, there's lots of penstemons, and I have my favorites, and you probably have yours too. So it's a very, very wide and diverse species that's native throughout the West. And in fact, you may not know this, but 51 species of penstemon are native here in Nevada. So we have a lot of different species to choose from. Plants, depending on the species, can get from 1 to 3 feet tall, with stems that spread at the base and become erect, and it blooms in April to July. You want to use it in pollinator gardens, and it can also be used for slope stabilization because it develops a really nice root system that keeps the soil in place. Most plants will require full sun. Some will tolerate a little light shade, but it does need well-drained soils. All of them need very, very well-drained soils. Has medium to high drought tolerance depending on what species you've chosen. And the tube-shaped flowers attract bumblebees and also hummingbirds, which is great. It also is an important bird and insect forage. So this photograph here is of firecracker penstemon, Penstemon eatonii, which has a deep red, beautiful flower that attracts both bees and hummingbirds. Very, very adaptable. One thing I'll say about this plant, when we put it into the landscape at our cooperative extension office, we found that the narrow leaf varieties were preferred, and that's because they're less attractive to the aphids. So we found that, and it may be that the wide leaf varieties were just getting too much water, but the narrow leaf varieties were not bothered by aphids at all. So look for those when you're looking for penstemons in your local nursery. Pinyon pine, or Pinus edulis, is native to western and southwestern United States. It can grow anywhere from 20 feet to 35 feet tall and 10 feet to 15 feet wide. Has a very slow growth rate, so takes a while before it gets to any considerable size. but has an extremely high tolerance for drought. So it doesn't require a lot of water, but it does require coarse, well-drained soils. So you don't want to overwater it, and you want to make sure it gets really good drainage. The seeds are an important food source for some of our indigenous tribes, but they're also a food source for birds and small mammals. So it tolerates drought, high soil pH, heat, and even a little bit of salt. So if you live in an area where your soils are a little bit salty, here's one of the pines that will tolerate that. One of these things you have to keep in mind, though, is because it is an evergreen, it can be a fire hazard. So you want to make sure that you're planting it away from your home. Also, because it's susceptible to overwatering, by planting it away from your home, you're assuring that it's probably not going to get excess water. So put it in that back 40 of your large lot, and it'll be very, very happy there. Okay, let's move to plants that are native to the desert zone. So these plants can withstand a lot of heat, and they can withstand soils that are high pH, sometimes salty, and don't have a lot of nutrients. So when you buy desert plants, you want to make sure to mulch them with rock, gravel, or decomposed granite. You don't want to put organic mulch around them. They will not be happy with that. And then they should be watered only once or twice a month during the growing season. Of course, watering them regularly when you're trying to establish them. But once they're established, you can back off on that watering. We've had some plants that are native to the desert growing in our landscape at Washoe County Extension Office, and we've been able to take the irrigation away from them, and that has made them very, very happy. If they do need to be fertilized, if you suspect there might be some nutrient deficiency, just put a little light compost around them, and the plants will take what they need from that. And again, some of these species may tolerate salt, which is great for some of us who live in those really poor, salty soil areas. A great example are the buckwheats, Eriogonum species, which are native to the Western US. And in fact, 142 species of buckwheat are actually native to Nevada, and some of them are even endemic to Nevada. In other words, they are only native to Nevada. So that's kind of cool. Buckwheats are a very, very diverse species that love the habitat here in Nevada. And no greater diversity of buckwheats occurs than in the Truckee Meadows. So if you're looking for a hike to find what kinds of buckwheats we have, just hike around the Reno area and you'll find lots of great species. This plant, again, depending on which species you choose, can get from 1 feet to 4 feet tall and 4 to 24 inches wide. It is a mound or mat forming plant. And the flower color will vary by the species, and even within a species, depending on what kind of soil you plant it in, it may have a different flower color. It's an amazingly diverse species, which colleagues of mine are actually doing some research on to find out how genetically diverse these species are and what triggers this change in flower color. So these can be used for ground cover. Put them in rock gardens and butterfly gardens. They're very easy to care for, but they don't flower till their second year. So if you buy a plant in the nursery and it's not in bloom, it probably won't be. You plant it in your landscape and you're disappointed it didn't bloom that year. Just wait, its second year, it will bloom. But it does like full sun. Again, it's a desert plant, likes well-drained soils, and it can be very, very drought tolerant. And it's pollinated by native bees and butterflies. And in fact, one of the species, sulfur buckwheat, which is shown in the bottom of this slide, in the bottom right-hand side of this slide, is a larval host for the lupin blue butterfly. So that's a butterfly species that we want to keep around. And sulfur buckwheat is an exclusive larval host for that butterfly species. All right, desert or purple sage, Salvia dorii. So you might remember this plant. This is sage, it's not sagebrush. And it's the plant that's referred to, if you've ever read any of Zane Grey's classic Westerns, The Riders of the Purple Sage, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about this plant, Salvia dorii. So it's native to the desert Southwest. It's a nice low rounded shrub that gets to be about 2.5 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet wide, has evergreen leaves and blooms in late spring. I love the blooms that are pale to purple. It really makes an outstanding statement in native landscapes, and the bees absolutely love it. One thing you have to be careful of is you don't want to overwater it, though. It will not do well with overwatering and it may fail. Also doesn't need to be pruned. So here's one of those easy care plants that you just get it into the ground, get it established that first season, and then let it go and just take over, and it'll be beautiful. Can be used as a low hedge or as an accent plant in ornamental settings. Another great desert plant is evening primrose, the Oenothera species, which are native to intermountain and desert southwestern landscapes. This plant gets to be anywhere from 4 to 27 inches tall and blooms April to July. The blossoms are fragrant, but they open in the evening and not during the day. And that's because they're pollinated by evening insects, night insects, and by moths. And so a lot of times the flowers are mostly white, and that's because moths don't see color, they don't need color, and at night insects don't necessarily see color, and so they love this plant. Good choice for hot rocky spots in a xeriscape. And by the way, this plant will bloom in its from seed in its first year. This is a plant that in the upper part of the slide on the left, there's evening primrose plant in a pot. We seeded that out, and in about, I'd say, a month, it had started to bloom already. So it grew up and bloomed in its first year. So it's kind of cool. Very quickly can develop flowers for those pollinators. Has high drought tolerance, so don't overwater it. And again, pollinated by those moths and those night insects, which is why we call it evening primrose. Four-winged saltbush, Atriplex canescens, is native to intermountain and desert southwestern regions. Gets to be 4 feet tall and 6 feet wide. It has attractive fruit with 4-winged bracts shown in the photograph on the upper right-hand side of your slide, but the flowers are inconspicuous, so it doesn't really provide a lot in terms of floral beauty, but it does have beautiful silvery foliage, which can make a nice backdrop to many kinds of landscapes. We've used it as a low hedge or as a screen, or you can also put it in naturalized areas. But again, it does require well-drained sandy soils that are low in organic matter. And even though it doesn't really do much for pollinators, it does provide birds and browse for wildlife. Globe mallow, another one of my favorite species. Foralsia species, there's many different species that are native to the Intermountain West, and they're very diverse as well. So you may buy something that's labeled one species, but it's very, very likely to be a hybrid of a couple of different species. And we have found that it's very, very promiscuous in the wild. It loves to freely hybridize with other species, and it seems to be okay with that, and I'm okay with it too, because they're all beautiful. The flowers are orange and scarlet. The degree of orangey or scarletness depends on the species, and it blooms from May to July. You can use it in rock gardens and for slope stabilization, and it's extremely drought tolerant. Once it's established, you really don't need to water it. It would prefer to be just left alone, thank you. But it does require full sun and really, really well-drained soil. And as I mentioned, the nice thing about globe mallow is it has a specialist bee, Diadasia diminuta, which is the globe mallow bee, specializes on globe mallows. So if you get rid of your globe mallows, you get rid of your globe mallow bees. So one of those really nice interdependent relationships that I think is pretty cool. Winterfat, another plant that makes a nice backdrop in a garden. It's native to western and prairie states, gets up to 2.5 feet tall and wide with evergreen leaves, and the flowers look like cotton balls. I use it as a background, and it's good in low water gardens. It doesn't require a lot of water, but it does require full sun and really, really excellent drainage. And it's even tolerant of salty soils. So if you live in an area with that problem, this is another plant that you can use. And it provides excellent browse for wildlife. One of the things that you can do, because that over time, it might get a little straggly and maybe not look so healthy. You can rejuvenate it by shearing it to within a foot of the ground every few years, and it brings it right back and brings it back to its very beautiful appearance. Okay, those are the plants I've recommended. There's many, many, many other plants that are available and that are native to our region. There's a couple of books I recommend. One is called Water Efficient Landscaping in the Intermountain West. This book provides you with not only tips for how to care for low water landscapes, but also how to set up an irrigation system. And then it has a whole chapter on different kinds of plant species. Some are native, some are adapted to similar areas. Water-wise native plants for intermountain landscapes is another book I highly recommend that talks more about those plant communities and the kinds of plants that grow in those communities. So you might want to check that book out as well. Both of these are available online. And here's a useful website I recommend, Native Plants for the Intermountain West. This website is maintained by a group of scientists, and I'm one of those people in that group that specialize in native plant propagation and landscaping in the Western states. So you can go to this site and look for a nice list of good native plants that a lot of research has been done with. You can also find a list of growers, and that's really helpful. So you can find nurseries where these plants can be obtained. So go to the website listed on this slide to find this website. You can also just Google native plants for the Intermountain West, and it should come right up. So to summarize, native plants evolved in a specific region over thousands of years and have formed complex relationships with other species. So by adding native plants to your landscape, you can support the health of local ecosystems. Plants that are native to your region will provide the most potential benefit to local pollinators, birds, and wildlife. And selecting plants that are adapted to your site conditions is really critical to their success. So make sure you pay attention to that. And then by selecting a diverse mix of native plants that will bloom and fruit throughout the year and mature at different heights, will create a variety of habitats in your landscape for supporting pollinators and wildlife. So with that, I want to thank you for listening, and I hope to see you and help to answer your questions at the Q&A session.